When I talked about Playboy in my last video, the thing I hardly mentioned or even really thought about was the women in these magazines, much less if what they were doing could be considered feminist or not. I almost completely avoided the sex work and feminism debate. Even when I talked about OnlyFans, that has been the reason for very polarizing discourse in the past few years. For the video, I very briefly looked at what the internet had to say, and let's just call it inconclusive. The one thing that weirdly stood out to me was the liberal use of the word feminism, asking, is OnlyFans feminist, or declaring that it's absolutely not. Some even going as far as calling it anti-feminist, undoing everything that real feminists have fought for. It confused me a little, not because I don't understand why OnlyFans and sex work is discussed in feminist circles, that's actually really interesting, but because there only seemed to be two options. Feminist or harming the feminist movement, while I had been placing OnlyFans and sex work in general on a pretty neutral middle ground this whole time. To me, uploading a picture of one's butt on OnlyFans was neither helping nor harming the feminist movement. In most cases, it's simply a woman trying to get by in a world that makes it really fucking hard for her sometimes. And yet, when we talk about images like this, especially outside of designated platforms like OnlyFans, women tend to get a lot of shit for it, from men as well as other women. It made me realize that, especially online, we're losing hold of the middle ground, which is not all that surprising, I guess, but that leads to, often even women, dismissing the reality and immediate effect of the patriarchy on them when they see other women acting in a patriarchy non-conforming, but also not typically feminist-conforming way. Systemically, women have a severe financial disadvantage, among other things. They get paid less, they have fewer career opportunities, at least high-paying ones, and so on. Therefore, they're suffering the financial consequences. This can, sadly, force women into doing sex work, or on social media acting in a way that brings them the most attention, namely, acting all sexy because that's what people want. This is, of course, not the only reason women dress or act in a suggestive way. Some just like it, but many literally do it to pay their bills. Why is that a bad thing? Why can't women use their sex appeal online that quite literally gets held against them in the real world? And why does securing their financial stability make them anti-feminist? Don't hate the play or hate the game, my friend. But what about the women that don't do it for financial reasons? Those that consider a booty pic a form of feminist activism? I brought this question up to some of my friends, particularly the one about quote-unquote self-objectification in the name of feminism, because I was very undecided. My kind of stance was, and largely still is, I don't care. I don't care about what women do or how they choose to present themselves, as long as it is their choice. I just want people to do what makes them feel best and the most like themselves, and what pays their damn bills. Leaving them that choice, without any judgment to me, is the feminist thing to do. However, I gained a new perspective from that discussion with my friends that didn't completely alter my opinion, but made me a bit more critical of the do-whatever approach. So I guess I just want to share some of the epiphanies I had and ask you what you think, because voicing opinions on feminism to strangers online sounds like a great idea. This should be obvious, but to make it absolutely clear, I'm not trying to invalidate anybody's feminism. I don't know if this is a bad analogy, but I think feminism is similar to religion, where there's many different kinds that have a similar ground theory and a similar goal. They just have different ways of trying to get there and different aspects they focus on, and that is completely valid. I'm just trying to understand this particular subgroup of sexy feminism that I don't fully understand right now. So this isn't me stating an opinion as much as me doing some mental yoga and asking questions about something I want to understand better. Also, feminism is not without fault, so I find it important to keep questioning it, which is scary because I don't want it to seem like I oppose the movement, but even great movements can take a weird turn now and again, and I just want to keep on top of that. A few more disclaimers. Nothing that I say is directed towards anybody in a negative way, because again, pinning societal issues on individuals doesn't make any sense nor progress. I also want to emphasize that the patriarchy obviously affects women, but also men and people of any gender identity. I won't always explicitly mention non-binary people, transgender people, or men, but that doesn't mean I want to exclude them from this discussion, and I don't want to dismiss any of those struggles. However, I don't feel completely confident speaking in detail about them, and that's also just not the point of this video. Lastly, because I know people get offended over this, when I say men, I don't mean every single man. Not every man is sexist, and not every woman is not. However, for the sake of streamlining this script and not wasting my breath, I'll continue saying men and women including all women, because it's not about individuals but about societal structures. If you feel attacked or offended because of it, maybe ask yourself why. The topic initially came up when I mentioned the polarizing WAP by Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. My standpoint was, and still is, just a bit more refined. It's good that women are now claiming what men forced them into for so long. A few weeks later, Khadija here on YouTube made a video about the video Vixen that fit this topic and my thoughts on it quite well, so I'll give you a quick rundown, but I'll also have it linked down below, and I recommend you watching it. Video vixens were popular in the early 2000s, dancing in the background of music videos, often R&B and hip-hop. Khadija talked about how they were, of course, willing to take on the role of sensual mistress or whatever, because it was a job. However, that many actually felt pressured into being more sexual than they were willing to be at first, due to both harsh competition, sometimes going up against erotic dancers that were willing to go further than most normal dancers were, but also due to men abusing their power, pushing them to go beyond their boundaries. And I think we can all agree that's fucking terrible, and in comparison, Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion singing about their vagine and dancing in the way they did on their own accord sounds a lot better. And who am I or who is anybody to judge and tell them not to do that? So, on this individual level, I see no issue whatsoever. However, the more I thought about it, the more things I realized. Most notably that there's a big difference between commoners and celebrities that we have to take into account while talking about this. Self-objectification done by well-known people, so musicians, actors, and so on, in photo shoots, videos, or on their social media, is a completely different story compared to Nancy down the street having an OnlyFans. The most obvious difference being, one has influence, the other does not. Although top OnlyFans creators might make millions and have tons of followers, they won't have the same cultural impact as a celebrity. What they do does not carry the same weight and will not be as widely discussed in public, so they rarely stray outside of their niche. At least not in a sense where people will know their name and face on this individual level. The reasoning for self-objectifying is also probably different. For celebrities, it's rarely necessary to do it. Once they've gained some notoriety, it's not linked to any kind of financial reasoning. It then becomes more form of expression or maybe even social commentary. They objectify themselves before others in the industry can. This way, men can't say anything about them that they haven't said themselves, which I referred to as taking back the narrative in my Playboy video. And that, in and of itself, definitely proves that some progress has been made. However, the more I thought about it, the more I wondered, they're taking back the narrative, yes, but are they reshaping it? This seems, to me, more like taking the words out of men's mouths, instead of actually changing what's being said, essentially validating it. So while I don't think it's regressive, it's not undoing the work feminists have done before, how much progress is being made by this? Or are they just dancing on the spot but twirling in the other direction? Like TikTok dance feminism done by white people. That brings me to the difference in the consequences of self-objectification done by celebrities versus normal women. As a celebrity, while they're still humans like everybody else, they are quite literally more untouchable than the average person. There's usually security measures in place at their house, when they're in public or performing, and if the worst case scenario does occur, and sometimes that happens, they have connections and resources to take it to court, or move to a safer space, or deal with it in some other way. Of course, being a public figure has the huge disadvantage of making them a target in the first place, and vulnerable in different ways behind the scenes, but money and fame does offer a kind of security and comfort that the average person doesn't have. The other thing the average person doesn't have is, as I've mentioned, the cultural influence and the representative role in the media. Media is so influential, and in theory has the potential to create, perpetuate, as well as put an end to harmful stereotypes. For example, the prejudice many still hold against trans women today is based pretty much entirely on their representation in media in the past decades. The same goes for the stereotype of Asian women being dismissive, or black women being overly sexual, or sex workers being junkies and criminal and whatnot. So what I wonder is, if famous women keep presenting themselves as overly sexual in media, conforming to the male fantasy, how does that reflect on the average woman, especially black women and women of color that these fantasies are based on? Because when we look at video vixens, for example, what most of them have in common is that they are women of color, or are made to look like it. Because back in the day, colonizers decided to literally make a spectacle of black women's curvy bodies, birthing the idea that black women are just these primitive sexual beings. And you'd think, well, nobody believes that today, right? But I see a picture on Twitter every few months of some fucking weirdo taking a picture of usually a black teacher or nurse wearing completely appropriate clothing. However, since she's curvy, the author of those tweets believes she's not qualified to do the job. Why, you ask? Because all they see is ass, and somebody with an ass couldn't possibly be qualified to do anything. If I wore the same clothes with my pancake butt and anemic skin tone, they wouldn't even bat an eye. So go figure what that's all about. I'll have some links down below that provide a better explanation and more context on all of these things, because I am very white, and this is something you should hear from people that are actually affected by it. And if you're a white woman, like myself, and you consider yourself a feminist, but haven't heard or thought about intersectional feminism, I really recommend you to learn about it. I'm not an expert at all myself, which is why I'm kind of straying away from going into a ton of detail here. But acknowledging and learning about the additional burdens many women and really any marginalized group carry can only make you a better feminist and a better person, so I highly recommend. Back to the effects of self-objectification done by celebrities. While probably most women will realize that female celebrities presenting themselves as hyper-feminine or hypersexual is not what being a woman is all about, that instead it's an artistic expression of self, maybe even a mockery of the patriarchy, what about men? Some don't even know what the patriarchy is, so any kind of critique of it will most definitely go over their head, and they're left with seeing a woman shake her boobs at the camera. How many will realize that this is a persona, but that most women they interact with on the daily do not look, dress, or act like that, nor want that kind of attention? I mean, I hope once a guy reaches a certain age he'll understand that not everything you see in the media is real and representative, but particularly younger boys could have problems comprehending this if they're not corrected, which many are not. And that leads to the world we're currently living in, which isn't a great place. This could also be a risk for young girls and children in general. Kids and teenagers look up to people, they want role models, and the media is becoming increasingly relevant in young people's lives. So could it be that they will start mimicking what they see, not being aware of the risk that comes with acting in a certain way and posing in a certain way, especially if those images and videos are then shared on social media? Those are legitimate concerns we have to talk about. I think the absolute worst thing we could do is try to shelter children from these things, because it's too late for that. But if we were honest and open and encouraged children to be open if they want to experiment or if they have questions about things, it could go better than we think. I feel like we don't give kids enough credit, while at the same time, of course, we have to make sure they're safe. But to ensure that, we have to accept the way the world is going right now and work with it and try to handle it accordingly. And that is another reason why I hope for a much more diverse range of people in the media. So young children can kind of pick and choose what they want to do, and they don't feel like the only thing I see in the media is extremely sexual, sensual women, so that is what is expected of me, and that is how I have to be or how I'm supposed to want to be. That has to be very clear. This is optional. This is a choice that woman has made. It doesn't have to be your choice. Now, looking at more or less everyday people on platforms like OnlyFans or even Instagram and Twitter posting suggestive images, what does that do? The influence of social media is increasing drastically, and acting like it doesn't matter would be very dismissive. Currently, I see two major limitations, however. Number one, sex work, although it's becoming less of a taboo, is still comparatively niche and has to be actively sought out. Even the biggest OnlyFans creator does not have the same relevance in the mainstream as Cardi B, for example, and their work will not be as widely known or accessible, especially for kids that probably won't be spending their money on OnlyFans, at least I hope they don't. Of course, where there's a will, there's a way, and porn is widely available, but currently it's definitely more of a niche industry. Number two, even if women and celebrities post suggestive pics on Instagram instead of OnlyFans, so a free app with more young users, the platform's guidelines somewhat restrict how explicit a picture can be. That does not diminish the influence it can have on how women might see themselves and their bodies, and how men view the subject in the photo, but there are limits. This censorship has been widely discussed, free the female nipple and all, and I definitely agree with most of the criticism. Demonizing solely female nipples is absolutely ridiculous. What I will say, though, is I think it's very valid to have different platforms for different things, and it's extremely hard to draw a clear line between artistic nude images and borderline porn. So them shutting it all down honestly makes the most sense from a business standpoint. I do hope they'll continue to refine their algorithms to allow more freedom of expression, particularly for people with female-looking chests, but I don't want full-on nudity everywhere I look. It's fine to switch the app for that. Algorithms aren't the only ones with problems distinguishing between the two, though. Men apparently also struggle with that. If you seek out a sex worker or pornographic content, then the context of that interaction/consumption will be sexual. That's kind of the whole point. But if you see somebody in the streets or in an Instagram picture, no matter how revealing or suggestive they might present themselves, the context is still not the same. You might desire them, but they are not accessible to you. You are not entitled to them. And you, as a grown adult, know that. But because a lot of men simply don't respect women and their boundaries, they will cross them anyways. And they start that shit so fucking early. Literal children are being harassed, many being girls of color, and it's fucking disgusting. Because who is then expected to change their behavior? It's going to be the child, simply existing in a female body, and how fucked up is that? If you're listening to this thinking, oh my god, that sounds horrible, well yeah, fuck it is. And guess what? This is reality. You could argue that algorithms don't get the difference between overtly sexual and artistically sensual content because they can't read the nuances, even though it does make you wonder why they can apparently differentiate between male and female nipples. But what excuse do grown-ass men have? There literally is none. And that is so fucking disappointing, disgusting, and frankly terrifying. We've literally taught algorithms to write newspaper articles and have yet to effectively teach boys that they are under no circumstance ever entitled to a woman's body, her time, or her attention. I don't even expect eye contact from people, and yet there are men expecting me to smile when I walk past them? What in the fuck? Society is obviously capable of teaching people to expect nothing because that's what it teaches girls. I've had a very privileged upbringing and my family has always been incredibly supportive, but my mom was very clear about the real world being different. How awful is it that mothers have to teach their daughters something like that? And how many sons had a similar talk with their dad? So the one thing you need to take away from this video, because I do not want this to be misconstrued, men have to do the work, because it's their judgment and their actions that have severe consequences for women. Consequences we can't compensate because we lack power and influence, since men do everything they can to not grant us any. They are disrespectful, they belittle us, and they reduce us down to the very thing they then end up judging us for. Women are not the problem. There are many girls and women living a very modest lifestyle, not showing much skin or wearing makeup, only having few partners, which is just as valid as doing all those things. But are they considered one of the boys at work? Are they magically not affected by the gender pay gap? And has that saved them from being catcalled or harassed? Or does it not actually matter, because the mere fact of looking female is already a burden we can't overcome, Because the same way men can't unscrew their dick, we can't deflate our titties. So how about accepting that multiple genders exist? I think it's time. Now back to the booty pic and self-objectification. In and of itself, I don't think it's feminist because it lacks context. A picture of a beautiful woman won't make the men looking at it come to the conclusion that birth control should in fact be accessible. You can post that picture because of what feminists have done for you so far. What I'm saying is not that women posting these pictures aren't still pushing the boundaries today. They clearly are, otherwise people wouldn't lose their goddamn mind over it. But the fact that women today would even think of posing in a certain way or dressing in a certain way would have been unthinkable even 100 years ago. 100 years ago, even a crop top was just, nobody would have even dreamt of doing something like that. And the fact that today you will find a crop top or sports bras advertised as tops in pretty much any store is due to the fact that many women have pushed the boundaries for decades for us to get here. However, the absolute shitfest that breaks loose in the media gets a conversation going, and that can be incredibly valuable. But that brings me back to the start of the video. Why does it have to be? If women want to post these images, that's cool. What I don't love seeing is women feeling like they need to justify posting an image like that by calling it feminist. Because society tells us women can't do anything that just makes them feel good without it having some deeper meaning, and that's just so tiring. I want to see more just confident women posting their ass pic because they felt good about themselves, because in the world we live in, that in and of itself is such a success, and I'm happy about that. I don't need the feminism hashtag, and the women using it, not all, but some, don't really need it either. They're truly just doing it, I think, to have an excuse when they don't even need one, in my opinion, and the opinion of any other half-decent person. But if you use the feminism hashtag, please make sure your ass pic isn't the only kind of feminist activism you're doing. Because if your activism is easy, you're probably not doing it right. And I hate it. I hate this idea that everything has to be hard, but it is hard. To end this off on a more uplifting note, I'll share an interesting thought one of my friends had. She looked at this a bit more future-oriented and believes that we need this period of self-objectification, following the male standards, until we find our own groove. The way many women tend to view themselves is how they believe men view them. The female gaze is shaped by the male gaze because that's all that most of us have ever seen. But if we're given the time, the space, and the inspiration by a diverse range of people demonstrating the way they see themselves and others, then the male gaze could become obsolete, and sexual expression or non-expression in any form could become the norm, or at least less sensationalized than it currently is. Now, do I believe at some point in the future sex will become completely not taboo? No. I think it holds too much power over most people's minds, and I think that tabooness for many is what excites them. There's also so much abuse that occurs in that context where I truly don't believe sex will ever be a purely positive thing. What I do hope for, though, is that we will reach a point where talking about it becomes normal, where we've removed the stigma, particularly around abuse, and have properly educated people to severely reduce the occurrence of abusive situations. Back to the more lighthearted, optimistic side of things, though, it will be very interesting to see how the acknowledgement of the existence and the increasing representation of different sexual orientations, different gender identities, and race will change how women and people in general are presented in the media, and how children learn to view these things. How do gay women look at women? We hardly get to see that. How do transgender women see themselves, and how would they present themselves without the pressure of beauty standards bestowed on women by men? How will Black, Indigenous, and other women of color move through the world when it stops sexualizing them for their race alone? How will life be when women simply existing in a body is easy? Until then, men, do better. Speak up when your friends or family shit-talk women. Make sure the women in your life know that you have their back, that they can come to you if they've been mistreated, and that you'll believe them. Please vote with not just yourself in mind and question your own thoughts and beliefs. Look at the extremes and ask yourself if you favor one over the other, and then ask yourself why. The thing is, you have to get uncomfortable. So please, put in the work, 'cause we need you. and to the women and really anybody in a marginalized group. Thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I love hearing from you. I've been getting comments under my other videos and it really makes my day, so thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Please stay safe and I'll see you in the next one.